Okay, so in this video, I'll be talking about Emanuela's video about a case for an intelligent designer, which is ridiculous. Um, she talks about how the topic is really interesting, and it is really interesting, but she turns it into a fun fact that completely undermines an enormously rewarding field of study. And in doing so, brutally misunderstands even basic logic. Um, she pretty much just says, God did it, yay. Like that's the only answer she gives in the end. Um, if there is a design, does this constitute the existence of a designer? This is a question. Despite the fact that the question really only applies to things that we know are designed, because you can't assume design from something you don't know of design, that it could be designed. For example, an organism. Um, So it's a good question when it comes to things we know are designed, but when it comes to organisms, what could possibly make them seem designed without involving conjecture, which is all she does. The entire video is pure conjecture. The fact that she knows the functions of certain things, household items, and just parts of her body, to her means that there must have been a designer, which is fallacious. Um, in the end, the only evidence for design is complexity. That's it. That you watch the whole video, and all she talks about is how these things couldn't have happened on their own, which again is missing the entire point. She immediately assumes that they just like appeared into existence. So, in terms of complex organisms, that again is explained through Darwinian evolution, the slow and gradual climb up Mount Improbable through genetic mutations and natural selection. And so within the first 3 minutes, she immediately shows this massive amount, this huge gap in her knowledge, this scientific illiteracy, which she proudly exclaims from the rooftops. Talks about how easy it is to just say God did it, pretty much. Now, what sort of cop out is that? I mean, she's not even trying there. You couldn't say that that's not an argument. That's not logical. So the premises that she proposes are that the object or the item in question has to have a certain degree of design. And the second is that they have to have a certain degree of functionality in order to assume a designer is responsible. This does not in any way, regardless of whether it's true, indicate a personal biblical God. It only indicates to a deistic God. That's it. The first premise begs the question. Plus, she doesn't define design ever. The premise itself implies that if there is any way you can twist it so that it looks like that's something that has been designed once before, then it must have a designer. The second doesn't follow at all, as if an organism lacked the functions required to survive, it would have died out. That's how natural selection works. If it does have the functions that it requires to survive, then it survives. That does not mean then that there's a creator. Over 98% of all the creatures all the organisms that have ever existed in this planet's history are extinct through this exact brutal process in which only the ones with the precise functions they need to survive do survive. And so by her saying that, she completely cuts it down and completely disregards all of the work, I suppose, this creature has had to go through in order to get to where it is over millions of years. She goes on to explain that function design of everyday items like bike wheels, iPhones, calculators, and then at the end sarcastically makes ludicrous analogies about how these things would have come about through her idea of Darwinian evolution. She talks about the salts turning into a calculator on a beach. Absolutely ridiculous, showing complete scientific illiteracy without hesitation at all. She then asks, which I'll answer it for her, who made the skateboard, because apparently that was probably one of the examples that she probably should have left out. I'll tell you who made the skateboard. It was God. God made the skateboard. And you should have known that. As a Christian, you should have known that. She goes on to rant about how much she loves her iPhone, not missing an opportunity to scream from the rooftops that she knows nothing about science. Ending her little analogy with a duh, as if she's just made this like magnificent point, or she's just shed light on some issue that we've all overlooked, as if she's this mental juggernaut. Oh, it's just so funny, but ironic at the same time, and it's infuriating because she's essentially a Poe. She is the epitome of a Poe in that everything she says makes her look like an idiot. So she returns in the end with the argument made by all intelligent design supporters, which is complexity. Complexity, complexity, complexity. That's it. That's all she says in the end, which is conjecture. As I said before, it's conjecture. It's just an easy way to assume and get the answer done. Complete. There's no mystery anymore. There's a creator. Oh, wait, great. But it's just as easy to assume a creator as it is to dismiss one. And you actually have more options in dismissing one than you do in assuming one. And those two are obviously the massive amounts of evidence for evolution and the zero amounts of evidence for a creator. And also the fact that God himself is the ultimate Boeing 747 in that he himself would have to be absolutely more complex than anything in existence and therefore must and warrants a creator by her definitions. She goes on again to misuse the tiny amounts of science, of which she probably Googled before she made the video, to try and discredit the rest of science with some poorly learnt law of thermodynamics, which doesn't even apply. She claims to have seen her soul in the mirror, which clearly indicates to me that she's delusional. She thinks we're the perfect design and have perfect functionality. Human beings have perfect design, perfect functionality, according to her, completely skipping over the fact that as apex predators, we are useless on our own. There is no apex predator, aside from ourselves, that does not have its own weapon. We don't have claws, we don't have massive amounts of strength, we're not that fast, we don't have venom. All we have is our tools, and we are a terrible, terrible creature compared to a lot of other creatures in the wilderness. Despite all that, we are of poor design. Our eyes aren't even complete. We have, and this is the funny bit, we have this appendix which has absolutely no function. None whatsoever. It's just, it completely destroys the argument in itself. And she talks so passionately about the eye, and yet it's so poor compared to the rest of nature. The amount of eyes that have been created by nature that are far superior to ours are astounding. Bees, for example, goldfish, bats, they're just ludicrous. So yeah, as I said, the appendix, it leaves nothing to be said afterwards. You can't, it's not that we haven't looked into it. There's just, it's one of those dying bits off that just didn't get rid of after where we've stopped in our evolutionary line. And the usual answer you get with this is that that's how God wanted it, or God works in mysterious ways, but by doing that you stop doing science. And that again is just assumption, opinion, and she's just made it up. She hasn't said that, but there's no other answer. She has no idea what she's talking about when it comes to science or logic at all. Constantly will she go on about how this is logic and this isn't logic, blah blah blah, but she completely misses the fact that she's skipping over absolutely massive fallacies within her argument. She rattles off more bits of trivia that she Googled over and over as if it's evidence, like the DNA to the moon, all this crap, as if again, it's all complexity in the end. She says she isn't on there to talk, but all she does in the end is talk, when she could have just come on and said, in 2 minutes, the complexity of nature means that there must be a designer, which somebody would comment, that's a bullshit, that's a load of crap, go away. She then goes on to assume that her God has a busy schedule, which is again ludicrous because he is omnipotent and therefore can do everything and all things at all times. So he was probably doing a whole range of things whilst he was creating our perfect bodies. She gives no credence to a deistic God ever, not once. So again, it shows her illiteracy both in logic and in science. Clearly knowing nothing of philosophy at all. She gives her God feelings at some point, which again she doesn't seem to think through, because what does God need feelings for? He doesn't. She arrogantly, such arrogance, it infuriates me, because a lot of her other videos talk about how Jesus is all about humility and that, but the arrogance that she shows, talking about how we as human beings are the most perfect creatures in existence in all of the universe, and she has no doubt that we are the best things in all of the universe. I doubt this woman understands how disgusting that is, just as a human, let alone as a Christian, for her to exclaim these things. But take, for example, the fact that she clearly knows nothing about science. I'm doubting that she's even left her house, let alone looked up at the sky and been amazed by the absolute vastness and beauty of the actual universe that she dismisses instantly as being essentially a barren wasteland of no creation or nothing of worth. She talks obviously that she has no idea what evolution is, as if everything was an accident. But accident implies intent, that there was an intent but it went wrong and therefore there's an accident. There was no plan. Nothing was made so that it would happen this way. It would just, you can't say it was an accident because there was no intent in the end. She gets worked up when she's talking about people not thinking that their existence has value, but anybody silly enough to not give their own existence value is probably silly enough to adopt a prescribed sense of value and a purpose in life, which in the end offers them only servitude and obedience. That's all it is, and ignorance of the world. Such foolishness has no place in the world that I want my children to grow up in. The only argument for design, as I said before, is complexity, while their motto is if you can't convince them, confuse them, and that's what she goes out of her way to try and do. It's been said that of all atheists, if all the atheists left the USA, it would lose 93% of the National Academy of Science, but less than 1% of the prison system. This is the sort of these are the sort of people that she would call foolish and denounce them instantly, claiming that they're illogical, whereas the majority of them are actually educated in the subjects that she claims to have expertise in. Richard Dawkins was he said once in an article, it is absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane. Now, he got a lot of backlash about that for many years later on, and then he wrote an article explaining himself. And he goes on to say that for the most part, people are just ignorant. The people who do know about it or who can't understand it are stupid, and then the people who know it completely and still deny it, they are the ones who are insane. Now, I understand that she is probably just absolutely ignorant. She doesn't have a clue what she's talking about. It's blatant. But for her to be so confident in her assertions about the world without looking into anything at all, to the extent that one could be certain that they're correct, is mind-boggling to me. And I hope she sees this and actually learns something about evolution. Thanks.